I have some.
Okay, we are on the fifth turning point of American history. This is probably one of the real significant ones. We're going to be talking about the Great Depression and the New Deal. So the time period we're looking at is the 1930s. I'm going to give some intro stuff first. But this is a significant time period in American history. Probably most of the stuff that you see today all comes out of the 1930s. So if you think about Social Security, which takes care of people that are older, people that are handicapped, people that are unemployed, all out of the 1930s. Probably the most conservative Republican today would be a liberal Democrat comparatively in the 1930s. So the whole country fiscally has moved liberal, comparative to where they were before that. So this is where the federal government becomes massive, the president becomes massive. Franklin Roosevelt was the president we'll look at, only president ever be elected. How many times President Roosevelt was elected? 4. Yeah, 4. He died in his 4th term, but 4 times. So now there's an amendment, you're only allowed to be elected twice. But he was elected 4 times. So lengthy. In the great presidents in American history, he's always in the top 3. So it's always Lincoln, Washington, Roosevelt. And usually in that order, or Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt. They are the big 3 as far as presidents. In almost any poll that you come across, they're going to be viewed as the great presidents. Now, for my grandfather, Franklin Roosevelt was the devil. My grandfather was a conservative Republican. My grandfather was a teetotaler. Does anyone know what a teetotaler is? You hear a teetotaler? You know what a teetotaler is? Somebody who doesn't drink alcohol. Okay, so if you're a teetotaler, it means alcohol. So they had made actually alcohol illegal in the country. And my grandfather was against alcohol. And when they repealed Prohibition, he thought Roosevelt was of the devil. And my grandfather, obviously I don't think that was the right position. He was actually very kind. He wasn't he was a gentle man, but he was pretty angry like that. So it's a significant time in American history. All right, introduction. So introduction into the Great Depression. We're coming out of the Industrial Revolution, and the early 1900s saw America continue to grow in business and really become the world's leading economy. Our exports rose like 400% up through 1870 through 1900. As business grew, there was a reform movement that also grew. So business grew. Business grew. And there was also started to be a reform movement that grew. Some of this was because of the excesses of the Industrial Revolution. I talked to you about what happened with unions. They got brutally crushed. Workers' conditions were unsafe. It was really poverty. It was very hard. So some people made mega wealth. Other people didn't get brought along. This is where socialism comes in. So Bernie Sanders, he's running for the Democratic Party, the presidency. I don't think he's going to make it. But he's what we call a Democratic socialist. He actually wants to really tax the rich and sort of redistribute wealth a little bit down. Whereas other people like Ted Cruz, there's going to be tax breaks to the rich. Clinton's going to be more of the same. Trump will probably be more tax cuts to the rich. Wealth in America right now is really concentrated. So the top 1% of Americans own more of the wealth than ever before in American history. That generally is not a great thing for countries. The reason it's okay is because, again, the whole country's become more prosperous. But eventually that can create inequalities that leads to revolutions. That would be like the Russian Revolution. So you had the kings, the monarchs, the royal court, you know, they're in wealth, opulence, and then there's people in destitution. Poverty always can breed contempt and eventually violence. It's even one of the things that happens in Islam. So you go to Brussels in France where there's these things, it's radical Islam, but the foothold of it is they're preaching theology, but to people that are hurting, okay, to people that are hurting. And therefore they're more amenable to something different and a message. You know, I don't think we have anything close to that in America, but wealth is concentrating in America, unlike any other time, you know, as far as our history is concerned. So back here, wealth was concentrating, workers were being oppressed, things were unsafe, so there's a reform movement. Business started to get regulated back then. So we had the start of something called the FDA, the Federal Food and Drug Administration. So now you have that, everything you eat, everything you use is FDA approved. So food and drugs. There are some things, and that's why you'll see certain claims like vitamins. There's real debates. Are vitamins good for you at all? Do they matter at all? Because really there's no test that really prove it. And so you'll see vitamins that will come out and they'll say, I take fish oil vitamins and this helps cardiovascular health and this helps this and this will blah, blah, blah. And then there'll be a little star and it'll say the FDA has not approved any of these statements, which means the FDA is not saying that's actually true. There's actually, I had a government professor in college who offered anybody an A in the course. He said, I'll give you an A. You never have to come again to my class, but you get an automatic A if you can show me one way that the government doesn't regulate your life, influence or regulate your life. You show me one thing. And I think in 3 years he had one person come up with a paper. It was around family traditions. It was in my class. People say, well, what about makeup? No, the government regulates everything in your makeup. Your food regulates everything in your food. Your clothing regulates everything in your clothing. You start thinking about, man, the government's just, they're somewhere or another, they're making a law or a regulation about your life. And some of that, happens here, where the government starts to get more and more involved with it. Some of that you can see is good, right? The FDA, Food and Drug Administration. Hey, there's got to be approvals, otherwise there's unsafe stuff that goes out, and you eat poison. You eat things that aren't good for you and stuff like that. There was also the conservation movement started to form here. Because with big business, you had people buying up swaths of land, strip mining, oil, lumber, just cut it all, cut it all down. So actually, as you know, I love hiking. And so if you go to Yosemite National Park, at one point, there was going to be privately owned. They were going to come in and log it. They were logging the sequoias, which are trees wider than this classroom. I mean, they're massive. Have anybody ever seen the sequoias? Maybe out west. I mean, they're unbelievable trees. Think about a football field. They're that tall, so 300 feet tall, and literally the tree is, this wide. There's branches that are bigger than a tree, the biggest tree in New Jersey. There's a branch on this, tree, and they're massive. But they're just cutting them down, just cutting everything down, and they're clear cutting, and then they were going to dam up Yosemite and this beautiful valley, and it's just historic and world famous, and they were just going to come in and dam it up and log out the trees, and so it was like this stuff that was like, wait, we can't keep doing what we're doing, with these things, and so Teddy Roosevelt was around. He starts national parks, so Yellowstone becomes a national park, and the conservation movement becomes, as Americans are seeing, like you're uglifying America of things that are beautiful, So the conservation movement started. Child labor laws got started. And there are child labor laws now. In fact, I recently was looking up child labor laws for a situation, and so like if you're, for you in this class, if you're under a certain age, you're not allowed to work before 7 a.m. You're not allowed to work after 7 p.m. You're not allowed to work during school hours at certain times. You're only allowed to work so many hours a day, and there's different things that are involved. Now you have to have working papers. There's exceptions to some of these rules, But there's child labor laws. Because if you go into the mines, which Lackawanna coal mine in Pennsylvania, which isn't too far, if you ever go up to Hickory Run, just go past that up to Scranton area, and you get into Lackawanna coal mine. It really is a great experience. It gives you a feel for something that's outside of our current experience that we can't barely imagine. Say, wow, there are 12-year-old, 14-year-old boys. So how old are you, Cody? 11. So think about another year, you'd be down in a mine for 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, in the dark, breathing in coal dust, you know, opening and closing this heavy door, and sometimes that door would crush you. And that's what you did every day. Think, my word, you know, just think about that, your son, instead of playing out, he's down in the mine every day. And that's what happened. And you guys, any other men, you'd be working, girls, you'd be doing sewing, dishes, and washing clothes. That's what you did. Education, boy, after 6th grade, not much. If you got an 8th grade, that was, already sort of something very different. And so reading and writing, you worked, and kids worked to make families make it. So working now, you guys work, you save your money, right? You save your money for things you want. Back then, you worked and gave your money to the family, for the family to sort of make it. And they were looking at this and saying, he shouldn't be over a coal chute, and this is even true in England, the vent packs. It'd be a guy, Cody, sitting over things, sorting coal, doing this all day, sorting coal. And then that's why they call them the vent packs. And I think, well, we can't have our kids, this generation, work that way. So they start to pass child labor laws. And there's still laws around that kind of stuff. There were a number of amendments that were passed here. The 16th Amendment, which provided for income tax. In fact, if you're I would call radical, sometimes they're Christians, although they're Christians in name. Survivalists, there's people that like to live off the grid. I met a guy who came to our church for a while who wanted to be off the grid. He didn't want the government to know his name, his money, anything about him. He wanted to live off the grid. And it's what it's called. You go to places in Idaho, people live off the grid. They don't like the federal government. They don't trust the federal government. They hate the federal government. And they're usually armed to the teeth against the federal government. And they're living off the grid. And sometimes they're either white supremacists at times. They're people that just don't trust the government. Sometimes they're radical Christians. I put Christians in parentheses there. But they don't believe the government should get any of their money. And actually they would say, you're supposed to be taxed on profit, not on wages. Wages is simply an exchange. You're exchanging your labor for money. It's an exchange. Some people would say, it's illegal to tax wages. Wouldn't that be nice? No taxes taken out of your paychecks. That's not going to happen. Well, actually they passed an amendment that said they can tax that. But some people say it's an illegal amendment. So that was the 16th Amendment was income tax. The 18th Amendment was prohibition, which means alcohol illegal. We're going now in the opposite direction of that, right? Not only is alcohol legal, we're legalizing marijuana. So you go to Colorado, I forget which states, there's a number of states that have legalized marijuana. So that was a big debate. Are you going to legalize it or you're not? So now it's legalized in certain places that you can buy it for recreational use. I think Oregon is, there's a number of states that have done that. Well, here they were doing the opposite, trying to moralize the country, okay? Pass laws to make the country moral. Alcohol is the devil's elixir, it leads to drunkenness, which certainly it can. So they passed prohibition, made beer and alcohol wine illegal. So Ocean City is called a dry town. If you ever go into Ocean City, you'll notice there's not they don't serve any alcohol in Ocean City, and there's no liquor stores in Ocean City. Okay. Now you go right over the bridge, there are stores. Okay. So if you go over the bridge, there's going to be liquor stores right on the other side of the bridge, but there's no liquor in Ocean City. It's called a dry town. That's what they mean by that. This was making the nation a dry nation. And then the 19th Amendment was women's suffrage, which is the right to vote. Okay? So there was a number of things that happened in the Reform movement. And the last thing for America as far as introduction into the Great Depression, America becomes a world power. America becomes a world power. And what we did is we flirted, we never fully embraced, but we flirted with imperialism. We flirted with imperialism. Imperialism is when you go colonize other countries. Think about Britain. Okay, that's what Britain was known for. The sun never went down in the British Empire. So they would go, they colonized India, they colonized China, they colonized parts of the Middle East, parts of Africa. France was colonizing in Africa. Spain was colonizing over here in the Americas. So you had these European nations, these superpowers, that went out and conquered other nations. And what you did is you would set in your officials, you'd run the country, you'd lead the country, you'd have their people would work it. And you would either sell goods or get raw materials. You'd sell stuff into the country and get raw materials out of the country. So that's imperialism. Britain did this very successfully. So in India, they colonized India. This is what Gandhi's fighting and against the British. Eventually, India got its independence from there. In China, where Britain also colonized, eventually in China, Britain started to lose money. They were importing more than they were exporting. So at one point, Britain as a nation decided to sell China. They basically sell China drugs. So they farmed drugs in Afghanistan and India and sold them to people in China. And as a nation, Britain was basically a drug-pushing nation. And it's the way they balanced their budget and made money. And that led to what was called the Opium Wars, because that was resented eventually. So that's, if you go, I've been to India 4 times, you go to India still today, all the railroads were built by the British. Things that work in India tend to be remnants of things that were built by the British. Now, India's starting to modernize, but just really starting. They have a long way to go. So that's imperialism. You go out and colonize. So in one sense, Britain colonized America. We then fought for our independence. Canada was a colony, a province, a territory of Britain. They got their independence. America never really did that. We didn't go conquer Mexico and places, South America, Canada. We didn't do that, so to speak. But at this time frame, America flirts with imperialism. And we have what was called a new sense of manifest destiny. So we flirt with imperialism. And it's a new sense of manifest destiny. Does anybody know what manifest destiny was? Where America applied that? Yeah.
Moving westward.
Yeah, manifest destiny. And what gave us the right to move westward?
God gave them the right.
Yeah, God gave us the right. So God had given the white man the right to conquer. It was just our manifest destiny. It was obviously God's will. It's amazing. Anytime people attach Christianity or God to what they want to do, you always need to evaluate that at a broader perspective. So think. The moment somebody says, I'm a Christian, doesn't mean anything they say after that is Christian. Okay? So, it's not to be skeptical, but it is to be biblical. It is to be biblical. Remember, the Crusades were done in the name of Christ. The Spanish, the Inquisition, where people are being tortured, was done in the name of Christ. The witch trials were done in the name of Christ. So there's a lot of things that can be done in the name of God that have nothing to do with God. And you have to always think about that. Otherwise, you end up making prejudice, not biblical worldview decisions and follow. So you always got to think now, what you're saying, how are the scriptures? think about, we just heard a message of racial reconciliation. Well, think about Christians use the Bible to support prejudice. But just Genesis 1 defeats that. All men were created in the image of God. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So even male and female, he created them, which means there's an equality between the sexes, which is why chauvinism's wrong. I don't need to go anywhere else, really. I just go to Genesis 1. And yet, think about the amount of racial hatred that takes place in the name of religion at times. You say, wait, this isn't anywhere in the Bible. So you always want to think about things. So when they said manifest destiny, what they basically looked at, now we have the reverse side of this, they basically looked at and said, it's the white man's duty to sort of conquer our country, to go west. That's God's will. And they looked at the Indians as savages. And said, well, look at them. So we're going to go Christianize them. We're going to go do this. Of course, Christianize them usually meant removing them, lying to them, and breaking treaties with them. Now, that doesn't mean the opposite's true. So if you go to college, you'll find out the white man's, generally history revisionist, white middle-class men are evil. White men are evil. That's sort of the historical feel. America's been evil, and because look what we did to the Indians, look what we've done to the environment, and those kinds of things. You always have to think a little bit broader than that. The fact that the white man did evil things to the Indian doesn't make the Indian moral. Okay, right? The Indians did believe in all sorts of pagan gods. The Indians were not necessarily kind to one another. So it's not the idea of the noble savage is probably as much as a myth as manifest destiny is a myth. So you have to think through those things carefully. So Reform movement, America becomes this world power, America becomes world power, imperialist manifest destiny, Western movement, here's where it went to. We start to now think about manifest destiny out into the world. Out into the world. So this became more, not just a westward movement, but what's our destiny in the world? And this is where Teddy Roosevelt was a big guy. And Teddy Roosevelt was a unique person, and actually, in so many ways, very interesting. Very aggressive guy, grew up, lots of physical challenges, handicaps, but he was the guy that was going to overcome. Nobody would tell him no to Teddy Roosevelt. So he goes out west, he becomes a cowboy, people are looking at this guy, basically a nerd guy come out, and next thing you know, he wins their respect. When they would say, you would take a walk with Teddy Roosevelt, like back in those days, you could knock on the president's door of the White House and actually sometimes see the guy. And he would take a walk with a journalist, and he would just walk through Washington, D.C. Presidents don't walk through Washington, D.C. anymore. I think Truman was the last one that did that kind of thing. But Teddy Roosevelt would walk, and if you walk with Teddy Roosevelt, he goes, let's go for a walk. Sure. Well, Teddy Roosevelt walk is like going through the woods, climbing over fences, swimming the Potomac River. He did nuts things, and people were like, you're kidding me. He went and explored the Amazon. People were dying left and right on this Amazon adventure he's on. But he's going down called the River of Doubt in the Amazon. He's charting waters that had never been charted in the Amazon. It's a miracle that he didn't die. He's in the Spanish-American War, the charge of San Juan Hill. And this is Teddy Roosevelt. He's in it. We're just going to go. And Teddy Roosevelt said, America's going to be great. We're going to be great in the world, not just in our country, manifest destiny. We have a destiny for the world. For the world. And so this is when we colonized the Philippines. And that's one of the places we colonized. We colonized Cuba, Spanish-American War. So there's the Spanish-American War, which is between us and Spain, but it's in Cuba, which America sort of ran Cuba up through 1959, 58, somewhere in there. We conquered the Philippines, and we really vigorously enforced the Monroe Doctrine, which means we're in charge of our hemisphere. We built the Panama Canal. And Roosevelt established what was called big stick diplomacy, which was walk softly, carry a big stick. So when I walk in the room, I'm not yelling at anybody, but I got a club. And if you cross me, I hit you with it. And we were the guys with the biggest stick. So America's flirting with imperialism. Ultimately, America backs off it. We never do what Britain and France and Spain and those other countries do. Because for America, we go back to our Constitution, which is government gets its power from the consent of the governed. Imperialism is against our values. So America dabbles and then withdraws. And what we really did, rather than colonize countries, so you don't have American colonies in Middle America, South America, you don't have colonies. We didn't colonize Canada, we didn't colonize Mexico, Bolivia, Peru, we didn't colonize Panama. What we did was we made them dependent on us. We sort of intimidated them. They were what we call client states. We made sure the guys that we had wanted in power were in power, and they did the things we wanted them to do. So we were dominating our hemisphere if we weren't actually colonizing our hemisphere. Sort of what Russia did, we weren't as brutal. Russia, when they do this stuff, they're brutal. Russia did this in Eastern Europe. So Russia, like Poland's an independent nation, until you cross Russia. And then Russia crushes you. Romania, Russia crushed. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. Russia just came in. Russia tends to be heavy-handed and brutal. We just did things more subtly. This is when you would land, Marines and you're not doing what we want you to do, and we're paying you good money to do it. So it was sort of a semi-imperialism, but it made us a world power. We also fought in World War I. We're not going to talk about World War I as much in this class, except for how it goes into World War II, leads to World War II. We fought in World War I, and then the League of Nations was established, although we never ratified the treaty. So America became a world power in this time frame. Okay, that takes us to, that's just intro, background to the Great Depression. The time frame we're looking at in the Great Depression is around 1929 through 1939. Okay, the Great Depression. During the 1920s, this was the time known as the Golden 20s. Very prosperous time. So we're on background. Okay? So before we get to the Great Depression, this is the Golden 20s. Which actually has similarities to the 60s and to the 2000s. I'll explain that in just a second. The 1920s, the Golden 20s, very prosperous. Okay, it was like we came out of a war. America's the leading power in the world. Big business is booming. You have mail order catalog stores. Things just seem great. Okay, great. And as there's prosperity, with prosperity comes self-indulgence. And there was certainly self-indulgence taking place. In some ways, you can almost parallel the 20s with the 60s. 60s are known for what? Teen rebellion, illegal substances, drugs particularly, rock and roll. That's the birthplace of rock and rolls in the 60s and all that. Well, the 20s was in one sense, similar. You had what we call speakeasies back then, which was illegal alcohol joints and nightclubs. So alcohol is illegal, but you'd have a speakeasy, and they were all over. You knocked on a door, somebody opened the door, you gave them a code, you came in, there's beer and wine and alcohol and dancing and gambling, and they were speakeasies, they were nightclubs of the day. This is where dating really got started. So in the 60s, you have the free love movement, which is we don't need a ring, it's just the free love movement, and which was just another excuse to, I think, to exploit women. But in the 20s, this is where dating used to be in what they call the family parlor. So if you were, guys, you wanted to date a girl, you went, knocked on the door, and sat in with the family, the mom and dad and you and the girl in the living room, and try to act like it wasn't awkward. And and it's like, and then you might eventually get to take a walk and stuff like that, and dating was around church activities and that kind of stuff. Well, in the 20s, this is the birth of the automobile, and all of a sudden it went from dating in the parlor to dating in the back seat, and things were just changing. And it was like, it was just a time sort of a rebellion. They called the women, they called them the flappers, so the dress hems came up. Now compared to today, that's not a lot. But back then, that was pretty big. And even the styles and what the type of body style they were emphasizing back then, different than today, that sort of has, that goes through its consistent evolutions of what's viewed as attractive and beautiful, and that changes, seems like every 20 years. But back then it was just that kind of thing. So there was this indulgence, there was sort of this rebellious attitude. That's where women started to smoke boldly, and it was like, I don't care if I've kissed a boy, I'll kiss a ton of boys, and there was sort of this moral challenge going on. In the 60s that became extreme, but in the 20s it was radical. It was pretty, it was challenging the standards. So you have the tremendous amounts of consumer goods. So now people are buying cars. Everybody's getting refrigerators. That kind of stuff's happening. So there's what seems to be all this is prosperity that's taking place. So illegal alcohol, a dating culture, sort of rebellious flapper music type culture, materialism, wealth. And they actually had something they called the gospel of wealth. The gospel of wealth. And the gospel of wealth said two things. And actually, this was a articulated theory. That the rich were rich, the rich people were rich because of natural selection. So it was Darwinian. Think about Darwin, evolution, survival of the fittest, right? So the animal with the best genes passes his genes on. So the strongest survive, the best survive. Well, the gospel of wealth sort of had that thought, that the rich are rich because they're smarter. That's why they're rich. Natural selection. How'd they get there? They evolved there. They outcompete you. They're smarter than you. So know your place. They're rich, you're not. They're smarter, you're not. Not only did it say that, and maybe you could say, well, that is true. Okay, you might argue that. They said not only were they rich, but they were there because of natural selection, and they should be trusted. The rich should also be trusted. And that's what's interesting. So I don't know if you saw just the news the other day, Monday or Tuesday, Goldman Sachs, one of the major banks in America, very powerful, they just had to pay $5 billion in fines and penalties for basically lying during the mortgage meltdown in the 2007 and 8. They basically were selling mortgages that weren't worth anything to other people, and they got all packaged. And I mean, there's billions of dollars, billions and billions and billions of dollars lost. And people are even now saying, okay, you fine Morgan Stanley, until you put bankers in jail, nothing will change. Greed is rewarded and dishonesty is still rewarded on Wall Street. So that's right in the news right now. The $5 billion fine. Think about who can even survive a $5 billion fine. How much money must you be making be able to support, to pay a $5 billion fine. Because you're obviously making a lot of money. And some people say that's just not enough. Who made the decisions to lie? They cost other people a lot. And why aren't they in jail? But they're not, and they're not going to go to jail. And you know, I think there was a movie about this on recently. It's a famous movie. You know the name of the movie? It's just out. This whole big thing, and this whole what happened, and because there was one guy that saw it all happen, saw all the dishonesty. So it was a major Hollywood movie. I don't remember who was in it.
The short something.
Huh?
The short something, isn't it? The
Yeah,
short?
it was just out.
Yeah, it was in January.
But it was about this whole, he's watching them package these bad mortgages and sell them, and so they make money and other people lose money. So here's what the gospel of wealth is. The rich were rich because of natural selection, and they should be trusted because they're rich. They're rich not because they're smarter, but because they're good. And I certainly could say, you can make an argument, rich people are smarter. That's probably an argument. I love Shark Tank, it's one of my favorite shows. So if you ever watch Shark Tank, there's smart people on it. And they're smart people, the guys that run it. And it's about people that try to get their businesses and these billionaires that will bankroll them and support them. It's a great show. But I wouldn't say that they're good people necessarily, that they're necessarily moral people. So that's one thing the gospel of wealth said. The other thing the gospel of wealth said was this: poverty is unfortunate, but the government shouldn't intervene with it. Poverty is unfortunate. Gee, I'm really sorry that you're having a hard time, but the government should not do anything about it. It's what's called laissez-faire, a laissez-faire approach. If you ever hear the word laissez-faire, a laissez-faire approach to life. Laissez-faire is basically, you know, gee, I'm sorry, can't do anything. That's what laissez-faire means, essentially. I don't want to translate it specifically, but that's the idea behind laissez-faire. Laissez-faire approaches. Yeah, I'm so sorry. You see how the Bible would say? That's like saying, gee, you know, I see that you're poor, and I love you, but not doing anything about it. 1 John talks about don't love in word, but love in deed. You see your brother hurting, help him. Don't have a laissez-faire approach to poverty. So the Bible actually tells it the opposite. If you see a brother in need, care for him. The early church looked at poverty and said, well, how do we help? Widows, care for the widow and the orphan. Right? It's the opposite of a laissez-faire approach. But this was where America was then. Poverty's unfortunate, but the government shouldn't intervene. They would say religion should intervene, but the government should not intervene. So that's the gospel of wealth. All right, causes of the Great Depression. That brings us up to causes. Causes of the Great Depression. And I'm going to simplify, so I am simplifying. So if you go to college, you might have to do more than this, but I'll give you essential causes. One is over-speculation. Over-speculation. And this will tie into the mortgage meltdown that you guys just lived through, even though you're not probably aware of it. Over-speculation. People in business invested money they really didn't have. People in business invested money they really didn't have. You can also say they also spent money they really didn't have. This is what it would be like. You're all familiar with credit cards, right? You don't probably have credit cards yet, but you'll get credit cards when you get in college. At some point, you're trying to build credit because eventually you're going to want to borrow money to buy a car. You have to have a credit report, and you're going to want to get a mortgage. And if you don't have good credit, you can't get a mortgage, or you have to pay very high rates for your mortgage. So it's good sometimes you start to get a credit card, at one point, I always have my kids do this when they were up in college, get a credit card, you get like $500 max on your credit card, and you use your credit card and you just pay it off. And that's what calls it builds a credit report. Okay? And good credit then lets you borrow money at cheaper rates and things like that. It can be helpful. But if you have a credit card, you're like, this is great. I got a credit card, $500 limit. Let's go out and buy something. So you go out and buy clothes, you go out and buy food, you go out and spend money, you treat your friends, I'll treat you all, dinner's on me, and well, the problem is, gee, it's just easy, it's a piece of plastic, it's great. The point is now there's a bill that comes in. Oh my, I didn't know there was actually going to be a bill I was going to have to pay. I spent money I didn't have, okay? It's fun while you do it. It's just eventually you have to pay it. And if you're not making enough money, you can't pay it back. So here's what happened in over speculation. People were, spending money they didn't have, so they were buying things on credit. Think about the Sears catalog I talked about. We can buy, let's buy a bike. Sometimes people bought cars through it. Let's buy a dishwasher. Let's buy a refrigerator. Let's buy this. And we'll pay it back on time. Why? Because my job's going well and I'll make more money in the future. Okay. Some of you are going to go to college. You're going to get a loan. That's basically you're spending money you don't have. You're borrowing money from someone else to pay for you to go to college, and here's what you're thinking. I'm going to graduate and I'm going to make money and I'll pay back my debt. What happens if you graduate and you don't get a job? And by the way, defaulting on college loans, pretty serious. Okay, some loans, it's bad to default on any loan. That's a bad loan to default. Okay, now you got a problem. So Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton coming in and saying, you know what, college is for free. And, well, somebody's going to pay for it. And this is over speculation, spending money you don't have, or investing money that you don't have. So businesses essentially were doing this, or this is what it was like back then. It was buying stuff on the margins. And I'll give you an example of this currently. So I want to buy stock in Exxon. And let's say stock's $100 a share. Well, I only have $20. Well, what Exxon would do is say, I'll tell you what, we'll sell you 2 shares, and you're buying a share for only $10. And as we pay you back, and as the stock keeps going up, as the stock goes up, and as we pay dividends, you can eventually own the stock. So you're buying a $100 stock for $10 with a guarantee that you're going to pay us the difference. Well, what happens when the stock price comes down? Or doesn't pay money back? All of a sudden, there's this problem that starts to happen. You're investing money you don't really have. Here's what happened in around 2007, 2006, 2007, 2008. All sorts of people. Graduating college, you're married, you and your husband go out and you buy a $350,000 house. Okay, now in my day, when you got married and you probably rent it for a year, you saved money, you bought a starter home, which is a row home. We bought a row home, and then you bought a single dwelling home. You sort of moved up. You bought something you could afford. But here it was like, home prices are going up like crazy. So back in 2007, 2008, all sorts of people were saying, I'm just going to buy a home and flip it. So I'll buy a home for $250,000, and actually in 6 weeks I could sell this home for $275,000 or $300,000. And you have people that are buying homes, and then you have these people that were buying mortgages, and they're like young couples. I mean, literally 23, 24 are buying $500,000 homes. Well, we're both working, or I'm going to get a great job, I'm going to get a big raise, and they're going to give me, and then all of a sudden that's not working out. And now all of a sudden I can't pay the mortgage on my $500,000 home. Now what do I do? And I took out a loan, and now my home value, because this eventually happened, all these people, home values were going like this. They were just spiking. So I remember my home went from being worth $220,000 to $300,000 in like 6 months. Well, now some people are buying these homes at $300,000. They really can't afford it. Prices have gone up by speculation, because they think people just keep thinking it's going to go up, and then they start to come down. All of a sudden, oh my, I live in a $300,000 home, I can't afford it. But if I sell it, I borrow more money than it's worth. And government were giving out loans to people that were putting like 2% down on their house. When I had my house, it was 20% down. If you bought a house, if you bought a $200,000 house, you're gonna have $40,000 to put down. It's the way the bank said, if you default, if you fail, we don't lose money. But now people are buying homes like, I'll buy a $500,000 home and I'll put $10,000 down. How can you afford this home? Well, they couldn't. And next thing you know, home prices went, like we're over here. I think my home eventually topped out like $310,000 appraisal. And people were like, just sell it, just move. Well, our home came back down to like $240. Think about if I had bought it at $310, had borrowed $300, and now it's worth $240. I'm $70,000 in debt. I can't get that back. That's money that's gone. And then you have these mortgages, and this is what Goldman Sachs did, and others. They would take all these mortgages. So how much do you make a year? I make $20,000, but I think I'm gonna make $50 next year. Great, you want money? Here it is. You want money, and I'm just giving out money left and right. So I think you all think you're gonna make a lot of money in the future. Great, here's money. But also, you didn't get that job, and you didn't get that job, and you didn't get that job, and you didn't get that job. And now there's a problem. Well, I've taken all these bad loans and packaged them. And then people bought them, but they're worthless. Those loans became worthless loans. And people are just writing off. This is where things like short sales came in, which is something I never even heard about until the last 10 years. Foreclosures all over the place. And it's like, what do we do with these bad loans? And this is where the economy, so you go 2006, 2007 in America, people are making money and it's easy. And it seems like golden era. I mean, throw a piece of wood in the grass and it's going to grow into be a tree. It's that easy. And that's how people thought money was being made. People invested in portfolios. If you're not making 30%, 40% a year in my portfolio, which means if I invest $10,000 at the end of the year, it's going to be worth $13,000. That's a 30% return. Everybody's making 30, 40%, 50% returns. Wow, that's money's easy. And all of a sudden, crash. And you know what? Instead of making money, I lost money. My $10,000 investment became worth $8,000. Oh my, panic. I want to sell it. Well, now everybody wants to sell it. The $8,000 becomes $6,000. Now people are really panicking. We really want to sell. Well, that happened in the housing market. And our country imploded. I mean, that's where you go into what's called recession. So now you have higher unemployment, less money, wages aren't going up. It's very challenging. And then how do you solve this problem? And that's what we're still trying to figure out, how to solve this problem. Well, back here, in the Great Depression, what's this happen? Well, people are investing money they really don't have. Okay? It's like, I have a business idea. Great, what is it? I want to build a mall right over here. I'm going to build a kiosk and blah, blah, blah. Oh, great, here's the money. It's a dumb idea. So if you watch Shark Tank, which is billionaires, there's 4 or 5 billionaires. They're sitting there. People come in and say, I have an idea. Here's my idea. Okay? And they want to sell their idea and have these guys bankroll. Those guys are all saying like this. Well, you have a great idea. How am I going to get my money back? Or, I'll fund your idea, but I want to own part of your company. Or, I'll fund your idea, but I want this. Or, you got a dumb idea, bye-bye. And you start to see how they're thinking through it. They want money back on their idea. They don't want to lose money. Well, here's what happened back then. People are spending money and they're losing money. And once that starts to fall, it really goes down fast. So there's over-speculation. People and businesses were spending and investing money they really didn't have. And then overproduction, and this will end here. overproduction. Businesses produced more than could be bought. Businesses produced more than people could actually buy. So this is what I told you earlier, I forget why, but Corning, New York. We had a church up in Corning, you know, the Corning church that comes to youth camp, Corning glass. When fiber optics were taken off and everything was fiber optics, you know, no longer landlines, no longer copper, everything is fiber optics. And Corning stock goes from $2 a share to $120 a share. So everybody in Corning becomes almost, you know, instant millionaires. Janitors, workers, secretaries, because just over the years they had Corning stock. And so, you know, every year I buy 10 shares of Corning stock. I've been buying 10 shares of Corning stock or 100 shares of Corning stock for 10 years. And so I had 2,000 shares, and my 2,000 shares used to be worth, $4,000, and now so my 2,000 shares, my